Here is a compilation of some of my favorite stories. Enjoy. I was staying at my cousin's house in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I don't go there much, so of course I was a bit unnerved. Her house wasn't in the best area, and the neighborhood in general was quite creepy. All the houses were old and barren. When you looked at the windows, you could almost imagine some little ghost girl staring back at you. Anyways, the room I was assigned to sleep in was almost empty and barely had any furniture except for a bed and a full-body glass mirror against the wall. The room itself was lifeless and plain, so I didn't look forward to sleeping in it. Thankfully, I spent the whole day in Milwaukee with my cousin's family. By the time we got back, it was already dark, so we all just went straight to bed. Since I was exhausted from walking around in the city all day, I fell asleep quite quickly. But I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night, sweating and breathing harshly. As I laid in bed, an uneasy feeling came over me. My stomach was twisting and I felt like puking. For some reason, I was getting scared. It didn't help that the room itself was creepy. The only source of light was from the moon shining through the window. There were no blinds or curtains, so it was easy to see the light. I turned my head to the right to get more comfortable. This way, I was facing the mirror. At first, I didn't notice it, but then I finally saw it. In the mirror, it reflected the bottom of the bed. In the reflection, I could see a pale white face emerging, its long, slender arms reaching out ready to crawl. The eyes of the monstrous creature were two empty holes. Even if there was nothing there, I could feel its gaze paralyzing me. Its pale white lips curved up into a wide smile, so wide the corners reached its ears. I could only stare in horror, and the creature crawled out from under the bed, its white body jerking and shaking with its movements. I wasn't ready to die yet. I wasn't even married at the time. I opened my mouth and let out the loudest scream I could, waking up the whole house. Suddenly, the mirror cracked and broke into a million pieces, like little crystals being shattered into the air. I closed my eyes and raised my arms to shield myself. My cousin and her husband then ran into the room, asking what was wrong. I couldn't say much. I was too shaken from the horrible thing that I just experienced. I stayed up the rest of the night watching TV with my cousins, with all the lights on, of course. When the sun finally came out, I was comfortable enough to tell her what happened. My cousin hadn't seen anything in the house yet, but her kids had. Their 7-year-old daughter had once told them that she had seen a white alien under her bed as well. This creeped me out a lot, and I didn't want to stay there anymore. I left their house after eating breakfast and went straight home. Ever since then, I have never gone back to their place. 2 years have passed. They tell me that their daughter still sees the white alien around. Thankfully, I have never seen it ever since I have left. I am currently attending a private college as a junior this year. There have been a few scary events that happened to me while living on campus, but I'm going to share only one encounter. Some background info. I work until 9 p.m. daily and get back to campus at around 9:30ish. Then I cook and clean and complete my homework prior to showering. I always shower around 1 to 2 a.m., but nothing like this has ever happened. I live on the 13th floor. Everyone on this floor shares the 8 toilets, 8 shower stalls, and 6 vanity sink tops mirroring each other. There are not very many Asian women, so most of the ladies on my floor are white or Caucasian. One night, during fall semester, I completed my homework and realized it was almost 3 a.m. There was a chapter I needed to review prior to class tomorrow, but then decided to go shower instead and wake up early to review the homework. I'm sort of a clean freak, so I shower every night regardless. So I got into the shower, and while I was shampooing and soaping my body, I heard the door open. Someone came in to use the bathroom and flushed the toilet. I heard them wash their hands and the door slammed closed a few seconds later. Then a few minutes later, while rinsing off the shampoo and soap from my body, the bathroom lights went off in a glance. I didn't hear the light switch off and it was pitch black. Way in the last stall, I freaked out and quickly finished rinsing my hair. I turned off the water and reached for my towel. In dark silence, I quietly walked out of the stall and pulled the shower curtain to the side. I was pissed, thinking that someone probably pranked me. I walked into the aisle with my right hand reaching towards the front. I was so creeped out by the sound of dripping water that I felt like my soul left me. It reminded me of those horror movies, which I then imagined myself in. I passed the 4 shower stalls out into the open area where the sinks and doors were. As I kept reaching out, a billion of scary scenarios and thoughts popped into my mind. Hoping that I won't reach for some furry thing, I grabbed a hold onto the light switch and turned it on. I looked around quickly and there was no one there. This is when I found out that our bathroom had 4 different light switches, and in order to brighten the room, I needed to turn all 4 of them on. The one I switched on only turned on the lights that were above the sinks on the right. I quickly walked to the other side to turn on the lights on the left, then walked towards the wall by the showers to turn on those lights. I haven't seen anyone hiding so far. I then walked towards the wall adjacent to the toilet stalls dividing the sinks and the toilets and switched on that light. Now all the lights were on, so I decided to check the toilet stalls to see if anyone was hiding there. I opened the last toilet stall, hoping to see some girl jump out and laugh at me with a camera in her hand, but that didn't happen. Since I found no one, I dashed back to grab the rest of my clothes and things at my shower stall and ran out. I realized that it'd take more than one person to turn the lights off at the same time alone. From that day on, I never showered later than 11 p.m. Our bathroom lights never auto-shut off, and I found out that 2 other girls had similar encounters and they heard banging on the walls. Back then, in 2009, I used to work as a CNA in a senior home care. I was working graveyard shift, and this particular experience still gets me to this day. We have an elderly lady who we call Josie. During the day, she would be perfectly fine and nothing was wrong. At night, however, things would be a different story. We call those patients sundowner. One night, as I was making my usual rounds getting vitals to my section, I knocked and came into Josie's room. Josie had a roommate named Linda. Both of their beds are in the same room, but it's divided by a wall. So it's pretty much having their own semi-room to themselves. The bathroom was on Linda's side. I panicked and ran to check the restroom. Josie was inside the shower, crouched with her knees together. She was shaking and whispering things that I couldn't understand. I finally got another nurse to come and assist me, and after some time, she finally calmed down and went to sleep. This was happening at least twice a week, and we would ask her the next morning, but she doesn't remember anything. Her dementia had gotten worse and worse. She would be yelling that there was always someone following her and someone sleeping next to her. She eventually passed away a week later. 2 days later, I came back and did my usual round. I came into the room and I saw Linda sitting up. The crazy thing is that she was bedbound, a 2-person assist. She couldn't even sit up or turn. We had to use the Hoyer lift if we wanted to transfer her to the wheelchair. I see her peeking into the restroom. The door was wide open. She was giggling and saying, "I see you." All the hair on my body stood up. I quickly turned on the lights and walked to her and I asked her, "Who are you talking to, Linda?" She turned to look at me and smiled. "I see Josie sitting in the shower." At that time, I darted out of there as quickly as I could. I made sure another nurse came inside with me to help put her to bed. I never went back inside that room by myself, and I quit shortly after that. I never worked graveyard shift anymore too after that experience. My brother used to work for a company near Green Bay Road on the north side of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He had access to a huge fitness center for the employees. I remember it was Thanksgiving weekend. Now, for a typical Hmong person, our families don't feast until Saturday and Sunday. It was Thursday. We parked the car outside and went into the gym to play basketball. The gym was about 5,000 square feet and about 3 stories tall. It was a humongous gym. Since it was only the two of us, we used half of the basketball court. The other half was blocked off by a blue curtain. We were shooting around and all of a sudden, the lights turned off and the other half of the court's light turned on. I told my brother, well, maybe the building has motion sensors. We went back to the side and turned the lights back on to the whole gym. After about 15 minutes, the lights on the other half turned off. I played it cool, like, yeah, it was the motion sensor. I told my brother to chill and to not freak out. I ran really loud to the other side, but the lights never turned on. We started to freak out. All of a sudden, my phone rang. We both jumped, but it was just my cousin. He was coming to play ball with us. Nothing happened for the next 10 minutes. When my cousin arrived, we kept playing basketball. After about one game of hustle, my brother won and was talking crap to me and my cousin. This was when we heard a high-powered cleaning machine turn on. It was moving and cleaning the floor really slowly. I told my brother, oh, that's why the light turned on and off, because someone is here cleaning the floors. I'm gonna go check who it is. I stopped and thought to myself, why the hell would someone be cleaning the floor on the other side of the basketball court when it's pitch black? I went to the other side to check. Nothing. Not even the high-power cleaning machine. It was pitch black, no noise. I didn't hear the machine turn off. I told my brother it had to be the cleaning guy. He answered, dude, it's Thanksgiving weekend. There's no one here working. I walked back to the side that we were on, and we all looked at each other with goosebumps. Suddenly, the cleaning machine started back up, moving really slow. I dropped down the basketball. I told my brother and cousin that we should go outside to smoke, get some water, and leave the basketball. We would come back to grab it. Well, truth is, we never came back. We got into our cars and took off home. My brother quit his job after Thanksgiving and never went back. I know we didn't see anything, but it was a freaky experience. Okay, so just a quick backstory. My family is very fond of encountering ghosts, so I wouldn't be surprised if it was passed down to me. However, with me, it's scary for me because I'm only 16, and I was fond of it because it wasn't that bad. Obviously, as I got older, it just got worse. I often hear and dream about things that aren't normal, but I didn't tell anybody about these occurrences because I like to think that it's nothing serious. Eventually, I gave in and told my grandma from Minnesota. She took it very seriously and gave me a bunch of shaman-like things wrapped in red and even a red bag with those red and white strings to keep on. She took it really seriously, but I remember just laughing it off. When I came back home from Minnesota, I remembered setting the things up on my bed. I stopped having bad dreams and so on, but this one day, the necklace was hurting my neck very badly. I decided to take it off before bed. I remembered my grandparents from my stepdad's side of the family came and swept the house and cleansed it. They even had the joss paper to keep the ghost out. That night, I had the worst nightmare ever. I had a dream that my friend was telling me about one of her boyfriend's dead aunt. She said her name and told me specifically not to tell anyone this story or she'd come for me, but I obviously didn't believe her. I told my mom about it and just kind of laughed about it. But when I told her, I knew I messed up because the tension got eerie and I started feeling paranoid, like someone was watching me. I told my mom how I was feeling, and we immediately went to my grandparents in Minnesota. It was strange because before I could even tell my grandma, she already sensed something was wrong and told me to go see a shaman. She came back an hour later and told me that it was my fault, and that I was to not tell anyone about the dead lady. It threw me off because my grandma said her name so perfectly, and that sent chills down my spine. My parents and I left shortly after that, and for some reason, the roads were dead silent, no traffic. But of course it's my dream, so I teleported back to my house. The house had a scary hallway, and I felt as if someone or something was going to come around the corner. Something that wasn't human. I panicked and called my parents to get home, and they rushed home, but the thing was close to turning the corner until my parents entered through the door with a male shaman. The shaman came up and told me, "I'm going to crack these 3 eggs and see what's going on." He cracked one and it was full of blood. He cracked the second one and it was also full of blood. And then he cracked the third one, and this time it was filled with black ooze. He shook his head and told me, "The lady is very mad at you and is done being patient. She is going to come to you." At this point, I was deeply afraid, and I felt like the tension got worse. I thought something was going to happen since I couldn't wake up. But luckily, my boyfriend's alarm went off and I woke up. Ever since that dream, I never took off my necklace again. My mom thinks that I might be a shaman, but I don't know. This is an old story that happened a long time ago back in Laos. This was a story that happened to my aunt, my mom's sister. My aunt Mai was the eldest unwed girl in her village at the age of 17. So she was the mother figure to a lot of the children in the neighborhood. There was a young boy at the age of 6 that Mai took care of day in and day out because his parents were constantly arguing and violence was involved. Divorce is considered to be a disgrace, and one would rather die than have a divorce back then. One night, the little boy ended up at Mai's front door, shivering. Mai took him in and warmed the boy up. The boy said that his parents were arguing all night. Then it was silent and he noticed that he was home alone. Now these were not your regular insulated homes. The homes back then were just thatch huts made of bamboo and pieces of wood. The entire village must have heard them arguing that night, but ignored it. Morning came and the boy's parents still did not come to claim the boy. Mai took the boy next door to his house and knocked on the door, yet no one opened. Night came and Mai heard voices coming from the little boy's house. So she took the boy and went next door. She kicked the door open and, to her surprise, she saw another woman in the arms of the boy's father. Mai apologized for intruding but explained the reason why she was there, to bring his son home. Days turned into weeks. No one in the village heard or seen of the boy's mother since that night. The mother's parents came to the house demanding to speak with their daughter, but the boy's father said that she left with another man. The village knew the mother was not the type to do such a thing, and gossips filled the community that he murdered her, but there wasn't enough evidence to prove it. The father went around with his new bride, leaving only his son to Mai to take care of. The boy was not sad, did not mention he missed his mother, nor did he shed a tear for her. Mai got concerned. One morning, Mai went to go pick up the boy from his house. The boy came out of the house, waved in the direction of his father who wasn't looking at him, and then he came out of the house with a smile. Mai asked the little boy what he was so happy about. He said that his mother is taking him away from here. Mai was confused. She asked him, "Where is your mother?" The little boy replied, "Dad loves her a lot now. Every day he carries her on his back." Mai's mouth dropped. The boy said, "Just look at them. Aren't they happy?" as he looked into the house towards his father. Mai looked inside. She only saw the father's back turned facing them with his new wife cooking. No sign of the mother. My aunt said that a week after, the little boy mysteriously passed away. Some said that it was due to an illness that he contracted, and since they lived in the rural countryside, nothing could save him. My aunt, however, thinks differently. She said that it was his mother who came to get him away from his horrible father, and that's why he passed away. I feel like I've heard this story before. There's something out there on my channel somewhere similar to this, but it was pretty good. Thank you for listening. This happened to my aunt's friend back in the early 2000s. I remember my Netay was telling me this story because she went to visit the girl before she died. This story was told to my mom and my dad. I was around 8 years old when I heard about this. I don't remember her name, but let's call her Yer. This event occurred in Fresno. One day, my Aunt Nancy and her friends, including Yer, went to a lake to go swimming. It wasn't Lost Lake though, I know that much. I don't remember what the lake was called, but they went to a lake. Anyways, they went swimming and all that jazz. When it was time for them to come home, they noticed that Yer wasn't with them. One of the friends walked a little less than a mile away from where they were to some rocks by the lake. Apparently, they found one of Yer's shoes. Nobody could find her, so this went on into a full police investigation. Finally, after a month of her being gone, she miraculously came back. However, she was extremely sick. She was thin, pale, and went kind of crazy. At random times, she would act like she was swimming in water, kind of like a really bad butterfly stroke. Her parents were concerned, so they consulted with a shaman. Here's the sad part. Yer was a very beautiful, beautiful girl. She was the only child to a very old couple that loved her dearly. She was also a very good daughter and did as much as she could for her parents. The shaman told the parents that Yer's spirit had been taken by a dragon who lived in the lake. The dragon thought that Yer was beautiful, so he decided to marry her. Of course, the parents didn't want their only child to be taken away from them, so they did a ritual to see if the dragon would give her back. He refused, naturally, so Yer was placed in the hospital because she couldn't really function by herself. This went on for another 2 months. My Netay went to visit her with my Aunt Nancy before she passed. My Netay said that before she passed away, she woke up one last time. She looked at her mom and said, "Mom, don't cry for me because the dragon who took me will take care of me. I won't be poor because he is very wealthy and loves me a lot. Please don't cry for me. I will always watch over you." And with that, she passed away. My Netay said that as soon as she passed away, she became beautiful again. Her skin glowed, and her cheeks became full like they were when she was alive. Her lips were flushed with color, and her hair was glossy and thick. Of course, being an 8-year-old child and hearing this story scared the wits out of me. But now that I think about it, it was really sad. There's a dragon in Lake Michigan, did you know? I heard from Hmong elders to be careful around lakes and water areas because you never know what's lurking down there. Have you ever seen those movies where the Hmong girl's soul got dragged by a dragon underwater and then she had to marry him and there was no way getting her soul back? Well, something like that happened to this guy. My grandpa told me that there was this boy with his friend and they thought of going to swim at Lake Michigan. So they went swimming and it was all fun and dandy, but then the guy started to feel uneasy, so they went home. The next day, he got really sick and didn't get any better for days, so his parents decided to contact a shaman to see what was wrong. The shaman said that when he went to the lake to swim, a dragon dragged his soul down with it underwater. The dragon refused to give back his soul, so now the guy is mentally ill, I think. My grandpa isn't also too sure about what happened to him. I know that some people don't believe in dragons and some people believe in it more than others. Although I am a Christian, I would like to share my experiences with you all. I've told this story here and there to friends and family, but not as much. This happened way back when I was in middle school. I used to hang out with this girl. I'll keep her name anonymous. We were like best friends and we lived across from each other. I used to go over to her house all the time to play with her and her siblings. My best friend had an older sister who was suicidal. She lived in Thailand and had moved to the States a couple of years back. My best friend's mom wasn't her real mother, so she treated her like crap. Always yelled at her and told her that she was worthless. Here and there, she would lay in bed holding a knife to her stomach, ready to die, she would say. Her father always had to come into her room and talk her out of it. She tried to commit suicide once by slicing her neck, but she failed and survived her suicide attempt. Anyways, back to the story. I started hanging out with her more and more, and she started to open up to me. She said she had a dream about a lake beyond the mountains. The lake is a beautiful greenish blue color, and you can only find that lake beyond those mountains. So one day, her and her family went hiking up the mountains. She came back and told me that she finally saw the lake she had been dreaming about. She was super happy, happier than I have ever seen her. Days later, she opened up to me and told me that she started having more dreams. She dreamt about a guy, a very handsome guy. Now, in the Hmong culture, they say that when you dream about a person you've actually never met in real life, and they ask for something of yours, do not give it to them. However, my friend was already in love with this dream guy. The guy from the dream told her, "Give me the ring on your finger and I'll give you my quarter, so that when we finally meet, I will know it is you and you will know that it is me." She agreed. The next day, I came over and she told me about her dream. She told me that when she woke up, her ring was gone and there was a quarter in her hand. A week later, I went back to their house and she told me about another dream she had. She said that in her dream there was a road and it was dark out. There was nothing else but that road, darkness and a couple of streetlights on. She walked straight ahead because it was the only way to go, and there was another girl walking towards her, wearing white. She said that when she walked past that girl, the girl also looked at her and she saw that it was herself. With that said, she stopped having dreams about the guy. I stopped going over because I was scared after hearing what she told me. A few weeks later, I was told that she had committed suicide, sliced her throat again. My best friend told me that she had waken up early to go to the garden and her sister was still awake on the computer. My friend came back at around 6 a.m. to find her sister laying on the floor. She thought that her sister was sleeping, so she tugged her and saw her neck sliced and her sister pale. There was no blood on the carpet, just a little drop. There was no blood anywhere. They said that she used 2 knives. First, she used a Hmong knife and it didn't cut enough, so then she went and used an American knife. At her autopsy, the doctor found something very strange. All of her blood was drained out and there was also a baby egg in her that they had never found or seen before. The egg had been in her for 4 years. A shaman lady said that she had no blood in her because the dragon who took her drained the blood from her body. On the day of the funeral, I was deeply afraid. I walked up to the funeral door just to walk back out. They had to tie her hands together and her feet together. They glued her eyes together and her lips together. In the middle of her funeral, tears started to come out of her eyes, a corpse crying. My best friend told me that she was scared and sad for her sister. I was so scared I didn't even have the courage or strength to walk into her funeral and say my last goodbyes to her. After her funeral was over, her family sold the house they were living in and moved away, about an hour or 2 drive. Believe it or not, but this personal experience will always be kept in my memory. If you know anyone who suffers from these problems, please seek help. This happened to me in late July of 2019. For a whole month, my friends and I were planning to go to a lake to go swimming. The lake we went to was Lake Wazi in Wisconsin. My friends, let's call them my, Ba, Shen, and me. We were all excited to go to Lake Wazi because the water was so clear and the color is a gorgeous shade of turquoise. So we had our fun at the lake, played around and joked around. You know, the usual things teenagers our age would do. Me and I personally see, dream, and hear paranormal things, but we also poke fun at these spiritual things because we can't take anything seriously. I think we are just too scared to believe that spiritual stuff could be dangerous, so we never took them seriously, even though we have had spiritual experiences. A few days later, me, Xing, and I were coming back from a different trip. We were on the road and wanted to listen to some Hmong stories, but we were with Xing's parents and they were Christian, so we decided to just quietly tell Hmong ghost stories. I told them one of my favorite stories, which was about a girl who had recently ended things with her long-distance boyfriend. She was quietly sobbing at a lake at night. Later on, she began to get sick, and a shaman had come to check her out. It turned out that a dragon had taken her as a bride that night. The shaman was not strong enough to ward off the dragon, and thus she was slowly dying. Her ex-boyfriend had heard about it and rushed back to the village to see her, but by then she had already left with the dragon. I have always loved this story because it is so heart-wrenching, but I didn't think that the dragons would listen to me. That night, when I came home, I immediately went to sleep because I was so exhausted. The sound of water kept resonating in my ears, and all of a sudden, I was hip-deep into the waters of Lake Wazi. I saw something swimming around my body and surrounding me. There was something purple and something blue circling around me. I heard voices humming and speaking to me. "Do you want to see our world?" I said, "Sure." I was a little naive in my dream, but I didn't have much control in my dream. There was a purple dragon and a blue dragon that accompanied him. We had gone underwater, and the deeper we went, the more it was like another world. There was a beautiful cliff that was in the distance, and the scenery was beautiful. The dragons turned into a human form, and they were very good looking. The two dragons took me to their place, and they were preparing for a wedding. The purple dragon told me sincerely to stay here nicely. The atmosphere was feeling odd. I could feel the presence of others, but I couldn't see them. I had this uncomfortable feeling that was sitting at the pit of my stomach. It felt like I had to leave right now. I walked down the hallway, and there was a ripped, decaying hole in the ceiling board. I was able to leave the house through that hole, but while I was leaving, someone had noticed me trying to escape. I had heard a faint voice say, "She has to stay here for 7 days for her to stay forever." I woke up and tried not to think too much about it. My sister and I were doing dishes together. She told me that within the past few weeks, our uncle and grandma have been dreaming about dragons planning a wedding. I told her about the dream with the dragons, and my sister said I should tell my uncle because he was a shaman. I wasn't sure if I should tell him yet because this could have all been a coincidence, right? I said to myself that if I dream about the dragon again, then I would tell him. This could all just be in my head. I went through the day normally, and I went to sleep. Again, I dreamt of the purple dragon begging me to stay. He was holding my hand, telling me, "I will love you forever. I would treat you right. Marry me." He was very sincere, and it made my heart ache a bit, but he could have just been a very good manipulator. After that dream, I just sort of started getting a bit more paranoid and sad. I felt bad, and I wasn't scared at all. They seemed like they weren't scary, or at least tried not to be scary to me. I was just a little scared of the fact that perhaps dragons were real. All of these stories of dragons that our elders had told us were true. I messaged my uncle, and he said that our grandma had been dreaming about dragons preparing for a wedding and reminded my uncle to not go fishing. They had chosen me to be their bride. Of course, the word bride is sugar-coated in this story, My uncle said that dragons treat us like cows and pigs, sort of like a sacrifice. The dragon probably had been following me from Lake Wazi and made his start from there. Unfortunately, my uncle has no idea that I told that story to my friends, so if you read this, you now know why. For the next 3 days, I kept dreaming about this purple dragon. He would always talk to me and beg me to stay. This dream kept on repeating, and my uncle told me that I should stay away from waters and they'll do everything they can to protect me. I talked to my parents about my dreams for the past few days, and they brushed it off and just told me not to go near water anymore. They didn't want to do an oneng for me, and I was just stuck with my dragons. My uncle and I decided to just tie a string on me, but I had been too busy to get the string tied. We planned to get it tied on Friday, but these 7 days were getting shorter. One night, I dreamt that I was at a Hmong funeral home. I saw 3 little kids that were around a very big mirrored room at the funeral home. The 3 little kids were wearing Hmong clothes and were about 10 to 14 years old. There were 2 boys and 1 girl, and they were talkative and sweet. But then my uncle came in. He was wearing a purple dress shirt and black pants. He was dressed up a bit fancier than usual. My uncle said that he came to pick me up. I don't know, but I was hesitant. He kept insisting that I leave with him and that we didn't have much time left. I never answered him because I couldn't give him an answer. He was getting agitated and impatient with me. All of a sudden, my friend Sheng came into my room because we had plans that day, and I slept through my alarm. I found it weird because I'm normally a light sleeper. I never sleep through my alarm unless I turn it off and fall back asleep, which I never do. I pieced puzzles together and realized that it wasn't my uncle in my dreams. It was the purple dragon that took the form of my uncle. Goosebumps covered my entire body. My uncle finally tied the string on me, and I told him about my last dream. He agreed with what I said. The dragon took his form to get me to leave with him. If Sheng never came into my room to wake me up, I would probably have never woken up ever again. This story was told by a friend. There were 4 of her friends that went swimming at High Rock Lake. Now, there is a spot where people can swim there, so 4 friends were having fun swimming. 2 of the friends were swimming to the left, 1 was at the middle of the swimming spot, and 1 went to smoke. Now, there were also a few more people swimming around them in that area, but they were quite a distance away from them. While the one that was swimming in the middle was getting out to smoke too, he was in the water that was only knee-high, until he started to scream for help. The other friend that was already smoking ran down and grabbed his hand. He tried to pull him out of the water but couldn't. The friend was deeply worried and confused. Why couldn't I pull him out of the water when it was only knee-high? Whatever was pulling the other friend into the water was way too strong, and if he can't pull him out, he was going to drown alongside with the friend. So he had no choice but to slowly let go of his friend's hand. There was a huge commotion, and everyone gathered there. But by the time they had gotten there, their friend had already disappeared into the depths of the murky water. They called 911. Police showed up and tried to find his body but couldn't. Then 4 days later, his body suddenly showed up. After that night, people came over to his mom's house to help grieve. The younger teenagers were also outside by the bonfire. Suddenly, there was a gush of wind and a small cyclone that passed by the people. Everyone ran, and one ran into the house and told the dead friend's mom that her son was there. They said to tell him to go away and that he was already dead. So the mom said, "Son, you are dead. Please let us be and don't do that to us." Right after she said that, the small cyclone disappeared. The shaman told the mother that a female dragon had taken her son. People say that at High Rock Lake in North Carolina, a lot of people die there by drowning. Be careful if you go swimming there. This happened 1 year ago. I went hunting with my uncle. I was 27 at that time, and as we went, I heard some rustling and a lot of wind blowing. I heard the water moving around, like someone was swimming in there. When I looked, I saw something in the water, and it was swimming around in the lake, but I didn't exactly see it. I just saw something underwater. I looked away for about 5 minutes and tried to find some deer. As I was doing that, I heard something jump on top of a tree, and I looked at the tree. It was shaking and moving around a lot, and I was thinking, what the heck is that? And then something jumped back into the water and made a loud splash. I tried to look, but a tree was in the way, so I took off running. As I was running, I heard a lot of splashes, so I was thinking it could have been a dragon. I didn't tell my uncle because I didn't want to scare him, so I told my wife. She said that I didn't need a shaman because as long as I didn't see it or see what it was, then I should be okay. My wife said that maybe the owner of the forest didn't want us there because we were going to kill the animals, so they wanted us to leave by scaring us. My aunt and uncle recently had a baby named Tyler. My uncle is a huge fan of computers and gadgets. My aunt was fine with just having an old baby monitor that was given to her from a friend, but my uncle insisted on installing a camera system too. He always found excuses to buy new toys. After a few months, they moved Tyler into his room. This was when things started to get strange. Their son kept on crying at night. When they looked at the monitor, he seemed to be sound asleep, but the audio told an entirely different story. Some nights, he would be crying at the top of his lungs. Sometimes it would just be a whimper. Oddly enough, when my aunt or uncle went to check, Tyler would be sound asleep. They figured he was just having nightmares. We brought Tyler over to our house to stay over one night because my uncle wanted to surprise my aunt for their anniversary. During that night, my baby cousin was as quiet as a mouse. I jokingly told my parents that my aunt and my uncle's house must be haunted since Tyler slept fine at our place. We laughed it off. That night, Tyler's parents came knocking at our door frantically. My aunt asked me if anything happened to Tyler. I said that he was fine, he was sleeping with me in my room. She asked me if I was sure and I confirmed. We woke up my parents and they talked about what had happened. Apparently, when my aunt and uncle were sleeping, they heard Tyler crying. When they looked at the monitor, Tyler wasn't there. The crying continued on though. Frightened, they went to check his room but found no one there. That's when they rushed over to our house. The following morning, my uncle's friend, a Hmong shaman, went over to their house. He told them that there was another baby in the room. The crying that they heard was never Tyler's. Tyler was a happy child. The other baby was angry and sad. He asked if my uncle and my aunt had ever had any other children. My uncle then told us that when he and my auntie were still dating, they had an abortion. They were still in the midst of their careers and were not ready to be married yet. They didn't want Grandpa to be angry, so they hid it from everyone. My uncle's friend told them that they would have to throw a feast for the unborn child. The baby spirit followed Tyler's spirit back into the living world and may try to take over Tyler. If they throw the baby a feast and send him off happily, he may not come back. Of course, the pair threw a big feast for their unborn child. The shaman performed his rituals and everything since then has been fine. So this story occurred to one of my guy cousins named John. He is now 15. John's older brother, Ace, had a girlfriend that lived in Wisconsin. Ace and his girl made a promise to see each other at one of those Hmong New Years, and so they did. John wanted to tag along because he didn't want to babysit anymore. The pair stayed over at one of their uncle's house during the visit. During this time, they were able to go and see Ace's girlfriend a couple of times. On the third visit, Ace and his girlfriend were spending time in her room, doing their own thing. John thought to himself that he never went into the basement Curious, he went and checked. When he opened the basement door, he felt a cold chill. He found it strange, but didn't really care, so he just kept on going. When he got into the basement, he saw this big shrine-looking thing. He got curious, so he started looking around and saw a bunch of hair tied onto the wall. This really spooked him out, and goosebumps formed all over his body. Terrified, John went back upstairs with his hair sticking up. The two brothers went home a little bit after the incident. Nothing really happened the first night, but on the second night, John had a dream of seeing a young girl sitting at the edge of his bed crying. When he woke up, it was already daytime. He remembered the dream, so he touched the spot where she was at, and it was cold as ice. John told his uncle about it, and they took him to a shaman, where they learned that there was a spirit of a girl following him. He got sick, and they tied a red string around his neck, and he got a little bit better. The two brothers went home. Their uncle called their mom and told her about it. Their dad called a shaman to come and do jingle bells to send the girl into the afterworld, but that didn't work. After the shaman finished performing his rituals, he told their parents that they'd have to find someone to sleep with John so that the girl wouldn't come bothering him. He revealed that the spirit saw John all alone, so she wanted to be friends with him. Okay, but that just gives me more questions. What was the big shrine-looking thing and all these hair tied onto the wall? What the heck was that? This took place in Fresno, California, not too long ago. It was late at night, and I had just gotten done drinking at one of my friend's place. I was feeling pretty buzzed, and my friend had asked me if I wanted to sleep over since it was pretty late and I had no ride home. I told him I couldn't even if I wanted to stay, and that I had to get home. Before I took off, he gave me a pocket knife and said, "Take this. You might need it. Be careful on your way home." I shook his hand and started walking home. At first, everything was cool. I didn't seem to be paranoid until 20 minutes later when I got to Calwa Park. It was dead silent with no cars passing by, so to keep me from being paranoid, I was looking around until something caught my eye. In the middle of the field was a person. I couldn't see it at first until I finally got a better glance at the person's face. It was an old Hmong lady in these Hmong clothes for the dead. She had a rotten face and a long, bloody tongue reaching down to her chest. I got so scared that I started running as fast as I could. Fearing that the thing would be chasing me, I turned my head back to look, and there it was, running after me. After running for about 2 more minutes, I looked back again, and it was gone. I was relieved that it stopped chasing me, so I took a quick rest and began walking home again. Right when I got near Terranez Middle School, I heard footsteps running behind me as if someone was trying to catch up to me. I turned around and looked, and there it was. It was the dead old Hmong lady running after me again. I went into a full-on sprint, but no matter how fast I tried to run, it seemed like the lady was getting closer and closer. My eyes began to fill up with tears, and I said to myself that I did not want to die. As I got closer to my house, I started running. I ran into the neighborhoods near Terranez until I reached my house and started to bang on the door, waiting for someone to open up. My mom quickly opened up the door, and I got inside safely. Crying and scared, my mom knew what was up. She quickly woke up my dad, and he started doing his shaman ritual to prevent any evil spirits trying to come inside into our home. After he was done, I went to sleep. That night, I had a dream of the dead lady chasing me all over again. The next day, I woke up and I wasn't feeling too well, so I laid in bed all day. My parents called a shaman to come over and to believe for me. The shaman did all these kinds of rituals and tied a red string onto my wrist. He told me to wear it and never take it off. I did what he said, and these past few months, I have never seen or have been chased by a ghost ever since then. But he had a pocket knife on him. Why didn't he just use the pocket? Well, I mean, it's okay. Anyways. By now, you all know that I am Catholic, but one of my sisters and her family still believes in shamanism. The house that my sister lived in 1 year ago is haunted. Ever since moving in, they have had a lot of experience and a lot of bad luck. Money seems to not be enough anymore, and her kids' behaviors did a 180 for the worst. She went to seek guidance from a shaman to check and see what was the cause of all of this. The shaman told her that she needed to perform a jingle bell to remove any unwanted spirits that are haunting the house. She performed the ritual at her house, and we all went over to help. After the process and everything was over, my kids and I stayed late to help finish cleaning. By the time we had left, it was already dark outside. I didn't know, but I had this weird feeling that something was not right. We got home, and around 11 p.m., my kids were sleeping as usual. My husband and I were sitting in the kitchen talking. Then I saw my middle daughter, Esther, walk up to us with her eyes closed, then walk back to her bed and started crying and screaming for me. She said, "They are everywhere, Mommy. The shadow people, they are standing next to my bed and under my bed." I was so scared I kind of froze for a moment. I then grabbed her and took her to the kitchen. She looked towards my room and screamed, "It's in your room." She was shaking so bad, I knew I had to do something. I took out my Bible and my stash of holy water and started to pray. Every word that came out of my mouth just did not sound right. I was stuttering. I tried my best with all of my faith, and I opened the front door and told it to leave. I then told my daughter to go back to bed, and I gave her the Bible to put under her pillow. She was scared but felt safe enough to go back to bed. My husband and I quickly cleaned up and prepared to go to sleep. From then on, my daughter would never go to any Jingle Bell event ever again. I believe it was because her spirit was weak, and the unwanted spirits attached themselves to her. My sister met her boyfriend through a friend of hers. They went out for their first date. They clicked instantly. There were sparks flying, and it was a magical night. A few weeks later, he asked her out, and of course, she said yes. They were the perfect couple, but sadly, it didn't last long. Months passed, there were arguments. It would lead to breakups, but they would get back together. This had been going on for so long. It just passed their anniversary, almost 1 year. Only a few days had just passed their special day, and yet the argument had already begun. It got so intense that my sister couldn't handle it anymore. She broke it off with him. The next day, they talked again, but this time it was very different. They treated each other as if they were strangers. They don't call each other by babe or hun anymore, but by their names. They didn't talk much, but text here and there. One night, the ex-boyfriend had just gotten off of work and said that he was going to a boy's place to drink and chill. She didn't want him to go because she had a bad feeling, but since they weren't together anymore, she couldn't say anything about it. All of a sudden, he stopped texting her. She got upset and stopped texting him. She thought that the next day he would call her because he always did. The next day came, but he didn't call. Instead, she called him, and it got rejected. He would never do that, she thought. She really thought that he didn't want to be with her anymore because he changed so much. After a night and the whole day had gone by, nightfall had come again. He finally called her and explained that he lost his phone at his friend's house and that he got drunk. She explained to him that she was so worried and thought that they were really over. Out of nowhere, he said that he wanted to be left alone. He needed his space. At that moment, her heart broke into pieces. She held back her tears and said that it was fine. The next night, she went out with her girls to a party to get her mind off of him. The party was at some place in the woods in a cabin that was really big, pretty, and beautiful. She had a good time, but her mind was constantly thinking about him, thinking what he was doing at this moment. She told her friends that she was going to use the bathroom and would be back soon. This was a lie for her to get some fresh air outside. As she got outside, she got very emotional. She saw this lake at their cabin, and there were these kids swimming, and their parents were having a good time. She walked past them and didn't care anymore and said, "Someone take me away from this life. I don't want to live anymore. No one wants me, not my family or my boyfriend. I'd gladly die with no regrets." As she walked back to the cabin slowly, she dried her tears. She was about to open the door when she felt a cold wind. My sister got inside and asked her friends when they wanted to leave. They said that they would leave later. It was almost 3 a.m. at this point, and her friends were drunk. She was the designated driver, so she drove and dropped them off. As she was driving home, she felt someone was in the back seat watching her. She shrugged it off. Of course, she was a little scared, but from what the elders have said, you have to be tough. Don't show them a sign of weakness or they'll overtake you. She parked her car in our driveway, took her keys out of the ignition, and opened the door to get inside of the house. This whole time, she felt as if there was someone standing right behind her. It was so close that she felt it breathing down her neck. She turned and looked, and there was no one. Seeing nothing, my sister turned back and opened the door, then went upstairs to take a shower and get ready for bed. The next week, she felt sick. She said that she had a weird dream. She dreamt that she was sitting on a rock, just crying, and the lake was right next to her. Suddenly, a young handsome man came up to her and asked why she was crying. They conversed for a moment, and he offered to take her home, but she declined. He smiled and just stood there. But this really creeped her out, so she walked away and then woke up. She said that it felt so real and thought that her dream didn't mean anything. Even if she told our mom, she would say that it was nothing. Perhaps she ate too much and dreamt of silly things. A couple of days had passed by, and her ex called back. He asked her how she had been. My sister replied that she was sick. They talked for a while, and she felt tired, so she told him that she was going to sleep and would talk to him later. Then she had another dream. She was in the same place, sitting on the rock, but just staring off into the distance. The same handsome young man came up to her again and said, "Do you already have a loved one?" My sister replied, "Why do you ask?" "Because a beauty like you shouldn't be crying and getting your heart broken when the person you love isn't making you happy as you should be," he answered. She then told him, "Thank you for caring, but I'm happy with him." Then, the man said something that spooked my sister. "If you are as happy as you say, then how come the other night, when you were walking around, crying because of him, you said that you'd gladly die with no regrets?" My sister was shocked. She asked him how did he know. And the man or entity said that it was there, but she didn't see him. Right there and then, she woke up from her dream. She felt scared and decided to tell her parents about the dream. We waited and waited for our parents to get off of work. She told my parents what happened when they came home, and they yelled at her for being so stupid. They hurried and called one of my uncles to do a ritual to see what was going on. He came and told my parents about what had happened. Hours later, after the ritual had been done, he said to my parents that the man in the dream was a dragon. He saw her crying and lonely. He felt her pain and wanted to take her away to be with him. He said that they had to find a more powerful shaman to perform a ritual for her as soon as possible, or it would be too late. The dragon spirit knew where she lived at, and they are very vicious. It's hard to negotiate with them. He recommended that a shaman could help, so the next day we'd have to prepare everything, and the ritual would be held at night. After this, our family went to sleep. She then had another dream about this man. She was at the same place again, but this time, she was in the water. and it was up to her knees. The man was asking her if she liked him and would want to be his wife. My sister obviously declined, but the pair continued to go back and forth as he tried to persuade my sister. In the middle of the night, she suddenly woke up with beads of sweat all over her. We waited for the shaman and prepared all the necessary things for the big ritual. He brought 4 of his assistants and some really strange things. I don't know how to explain it. But as they performed the ritual, they told my sister to go and sit on the long table. She sat by herself and just waited. As the shaman was throwing rice and spitting water over her, she looked so weak and started to turn pale. Then she blacked out. While she blacked out, she got up and roared. She told the shaman to back off. If he didn't, he'd regret it. The shaman bravely shouted back at the entity, stating that humans and spirits cannot be together. He did whatever he could to fight off the evil within her. He used his sword on her, and she fell down screaming in pain. She got right back up and tried to attack him but missed. The shaman told his assistants to hold her down while he put something on her. She screamed and roared so loud that everyone got scared. My sister then passed out, so we carried her to lay down on the couch. We cried and told her that she'd be alright. The shaman and his assistants told us to get a hold of the boyfriend because the dragon spirit took her soul so far with him into the other realm. The shaman was trying to get her back. He was calling for her, but she would not answer. If her boyfriend called her back, perhaps she may answer. It took us about 30 minutes to get a hold of her boyfriend. I told him what happened, and he rushed over to our place. He came and sat next to my sister, calling her name. She was so pale at this point, turning blue. He then yelled and pleaded for her to come back. He apologized and just wanted her to turn around. He called her for quite some time. Everyone was calling for my sister. An hour later, she finally woke up and wasn't so pale anymore. The first person she saw was her boyfriend. He hugged her so tight and yelled at her for being so stupid. She cried and he cried. Everybody cried. However, we were not prepared for what my sister was going to tell us. No matter how much her boyfriend pleaded for her to come back, she apologized and said that it was too late. The dragon spirit had already taken her soul too deep. She was only able to come back one more time because she begged to see him and our family. She said her goodbyes and her boyfriend begged for her to stay. She told us how much she loved us, and with that, she collapsed. We were all crying. It was a heartbreaking moment, and she had left us. We were too late. An hour later, the shaman said that the dragon took her too far. He already got her into his home. There was nothing that he could do. He had too many guards and he couldn't beat them. He didn't have enough energy. He said he was sorry and that he was not powerful enough. Our family threw a funeral for my sister. Her boyfriend came and sat by her for the whole 3 days. He lived an hour away from my sister. He loved her so much, he did almost everything for her. They were the perfect couple, although they had a lot of arguments. He cried non-stop and was miserable. I don't know if he ever moved on, but it was heartbreaking for them and our family. She wasn't a perfect sister, but she knew what she wanted. She'd find her way to get it. My sister was a rebel, but she knew her limits. The only person that she was close to was me. My sister did a lot for us, and we took her for granted and didn't believe her when she needed us the most. If only we could go back in time, we would be by your side. May you rest in peace. Dang, that's a sad story. Anyways, make sure you subscribe. Thank you. In our Hmong culture, we believe in spirits and lost souls that don't want to leave. I have heard so many stories about people experiencing a lot of weird stuff, but as for myself, I haven't really experienced anything. Well, that was before I met my husband. It all started when we were still dating. He was a Catholic and I was a shaman at that time. We had a long-distance relationship and we both lived in different towns. It takes about 3 hours, close to 4, from his town to mine, even though he still comes over every weekend to see me. He would come on Friday night and leave on Sunday afternoon. On this Thursday night, he decided to come and surprise me, and oh, he did. He usually doesn't come on the weekdays due to work. It was around 7 p.m. when he arrived. He was going to stay with me until midnight. Since he worked at 7 in the morning, he wanted to get back home and try to get at least 1 hour of sleep before going to work. On that night, we were both laying on the floor watching a movie together. Soon, it was getting close to midnight, so I decided to get something ready for him to eat before he leaves because I didn't want him to stop anywhere to get food since it was so late. From the kitchen, I could still see him lying on the living room floor on his back. He was facing the ceiling with his eyes closed. I walked over and crawled on top of him and kissed him on the lips and his neck, then went back to the kitchen. I kept on doing that to him, and each time when I went over to kiss him, he always opened his eyes and looked at me, then closed them again. After I was done with everything, I walked over to him and sat next to him. He looked like he was sleeping. I continued staring at him, but then I noticed his eyes were not fully closed, and it looked like he was looking at me. I continued to sit there and stare at him. Then his eyes started moving from side to side, but I still continued to stare at him. It looked like he was looking at me, and all of a sudden he said, "Help me," in a very soft and weak voice, almost like he couldn't breathe. I got scared and slapped him in the face. He jumped up and started swearing and swinging his fist in the air. He was breathing so hard and trying to catch his breath. Finally, when he had calmed down, I asked him what was going on and why he was looking at me like that when he was laying down. He asked me why I didn't wake him up, and I said, "How was I supposed to know you wanted me to wake you up?" And he said, "I was giving you signals with my eyes." I was just confused and didn't understand what he meant at all during this time. He told me that when I came to kiss him, he knew it was me because he opened his eyes and saw me. After I continued doing that, he knew it was me. But then the last one, when he thought it was me and opened his eyes, instead, he sees me sitting next to him staring at him. But it still felt like someone was still on top of him, even though he saw nothing. He could feel a heavy weight on him. He could still feel like someone was nibbling on his lips and his neck. He tried so hard to move, but he couldn't, so he tried to signal me with his eyes, but I didn't get it. He tried so hard and finally was able to ask for help. I got really scared when he told me. Right then, I felt weird. My arms and neck had goosebumps all over it. I felt as if my soul had left my body. We decided to leave and go to my mom's house. Standing outside, looking at my apartment, it felt like someone was still in there. This was the first time I had felt this way about my place. All of a sudden, somehow, I started feeling really sad, like someone had come and took over my home. When we got to my mom's house, we told her what happened. But like every Hmong parent, she said that it was nothing and just to not think much of it. It was way past midnight, so soon that he kissed me goodbye and left for home. Ever since that day, I was scared to go home to my apartment. I stayed with my mom for almost a whole month. In the daytime, I would take my mom and go over to my apartment to get the things that I needed. I was starting to feel homesick, so one day I decided to go to my apartment to see what would happen. I packed up all my belongings and got into the car. When I walked into my apartment, I stood by the door and looked around. Everything seemed normal. I didn't have that feeling of being scared. It just felt like I was home. I unpacked my stuff and turned on the TV and sat on my couch. I thought it was strange that I didn't feel weird at all, but maybe it was because I missed my home so much. I wasn't scared anymore and just thought of it as a bad dream, but it was weird that every time when my husband came over, he told me that It felt as if we weren't the only ones in the apartment. I was starting to get angry when he told me that, because I don't feel anything. We would go and stay at my mom's house, but every time he would come over, he would tell me that he kept feeling another presence in the apartment. A couple of days later, I talked to some of my friends about it, and they said that maybe it's because he's Catholic and I'm shaman, and as a shaman, we believe in ghosts and other weird stuff. Maybe the spirits around me doesn't like him because he was Catholic and they were trying to scare him, but not me because I'm shaman. Now that we are married, it's weird how once in a while it still happens to him. Every night when we go to sleep, I always have to make sure my feet are close to his in case it happens. When it happens, he can't move his body, but somehow he could still move his feet, and I could feel it when he moves it. I would wake up and then shake him awake. He would always wake up breathing very heavily. It's also very strange how everything is different from what I expected it to be. In my culture, we believe that people who still practice shamanism experience things like this, compared to others who may have converted to Christianity or Catholicism. Even though my husband has experienced many things like these, he still doesn't believe in it. I haven't experienced any, but I believe it. Well, some of it. I guess there's still more to the world that I don't understand. In 1989, my family moved to a house located 2 blocks away from Riverside Park in Wausau, Wisconsin. This was around the summer before I was going to enter 2nd grade. With the park being that close, the neighborhood kids and I spent most of our summer vacation there, playing tag, fishing, and bike riding. There's a bridge that connects the main park to another section called Burns Island. The water, of course, is jet black, either polluted or evil. The kids refused to go to that section of the park because it was the most haunted. The story went that hundreds of years ago, a witch inhabited the park area. There was a boy who was fishing in the area and fell in the river and drowned. The townspeople blamed the witch and burned her in her tiny hut. A bloody battle rose between the witch and the townspeople. Bodies of the townspeople were thrown into the river. Finally, when the battle ended, the townspeople buried the dead and left the area. The witch disappeared, but its spirit still roamed the park. My cousins had an experience at Riverside once. One night, my cousins were hanging out with friends in the parking lot, standing outside their cars and talking. The only source of light was the vehicle headlights. All of the park lights were dead. Gang members once infested the park and the city just gave up on cleaning it. The group heard slurping sounds and splashing water. They looked towards the river and saw a dark figure hunched over near the riverbank as if it was peeling and eating something. The figure turned around and they all saw a pair of red eyes looking back at them. As it walked closer to them, the group jumped into their cars and drove off, never looking back. They told the story to my father. The next morning, my father went to investigate. He came back with a report that there were open crayfish shells and decaying fish on the riverbank, but nothing more. The next story comes from my older brother, CK. He worked the second shift and got off work at midnight. Having such a work schedule, for weeks he hasn't seen his buddies, so during one of his breaks he called his friends and set up a time to hang out that night after work. They all chose to meet up at Riverside to meet since it was close to where their friends lived and his workplace. After my brother got off of work, he drove past a supermarket where he saw his buddies in the parking lot loading beer into the back trunk of their car. My brother waved at them and the guys waved back. He then went to Riverside to wait for the guys. He parked close to the riverbank, rolled down the driver's side window about an inch, then pulled down his seat and lay down looking at the night sky in his car. All of a sudden, he saw a woman with flowing blonde hair running past his car. She then came up to his window and tapped it. My brother got up and asked her what she wanted. At first, my brother thought that the woman was a victim of SA because her clothes were ripped and her hair was messy. The woman was hysterical and crying, and she was trying to slide her finger through the opening in the driver's window. She told my brother that, "Everyone is dying. You have to help me. An old witch is down there. She's killing everyone. She killed my family. It's so bloody down there." Thinking that she's just another nutcase, my brother quickly closed his window. The woman jumped back. My brother then backed out of the parking lot. Just as he was doing so, his buddies drove into the parking lot, and the woman walked in between the vehicles just as they passed each other. My brother got out of his car and ran towards his friends. The woman was nowhere to be found. "Did you see her? Tell me you saw her," my brother shouted at his friends. "Who?" they asked. "That woman. She ran right in between our cars just as you guys were coming in." "We didn't see anyone." Then my brother said, "Man, what took you guys so long? You guys were just at the supermarket. It only takes 2 minutes to get here." The guys looked at each other and said, "What are you talking about? We were never at the supermarket. We just came from the east side. We had to go pick up some stuff at my house." The group looked at each other and they all left home. Ever since then, they decided never to meet up at Riverside again. Alright, let me start by telling you this. My nationality is Hmong. We strongly believe in the paranormal or spirits or whatever you call it. Anyways, I'm not quite sure what I have experienced, if it was real or just my imagination playing tricks on me, but it did scare me very much because I have never had anything like this happen to me before. I believe it was towards the end of 2004 when this event occurred. I was 3 to 4 months pregnant with my very first child. It was early in the morning, around 6 a.m. My husband had just left for work. While I was still asleep in bed, I suddenly woke up to this very weird sense that surrounded the room, as if I was dreaming. I remember seeing clouds or fogs on my bedroom ceiling. I mean, it was just so weird. I couldn't rule it out if this was even real. It was as if I was being possessed or seduced. My eyes were open, but I was so sleepy. Whatever it was, it did not want me to see them. It was as if I was only dreaming, seeing an illusion, or hallucinating. Do you ever feel like when you drink too much and you become drunk, but you're still wide awake and you're seeing stuff in what people do? That's how I felt during that moment. I was lying flat on my bed when I heard sounds of little girls laughing. At that moment, my heart started to beat so fast and I was very scared and sweating. I raised my eyes to look at the end of the bed where I thought I heard the laughter come from. I couldn't see much, but what I did see was 2 little heads popping up and down at the end of my bed. I could only see their forehead, and they appeared to be 2 little girls playing and chasing one another. Don't forget, I still felt sleepy and the fogs were still around in my room. Then I noticed that the 2 girls started to walk to my side of the bed where I was lying. I was freaking out so much, so I just closed my eyes and pretended to fall asleep. Then, I felt the both of them climbing onto my bed with me, and I could just feel them looking down at my face, laughing and giggling. At that moment, all I knew to do was to close my eyes. This event lasted for a few minutes, but it seemed forever. The next thing I knew, I had actually fallen asleep. One thing to keep in mind was that these little girls, they were also Hmong like me. When they were walking around to my side of the bed, I was able to take a quick glimpse at them and noticed that they were wearing our traditional clothes. After some hours of sleeping, I woke up and didn't even remember what just happened. I did my usual chores around the house and just relaxed watching television. My husband got home from work, which was around 3:40 p.m. We drove around, just cruising sometime between 6 to 7 p.m. It was already dark. While I was sitting on the passenger side, just looking out the window daydreaming, that's when I started to remember everything that happened to me that morning. I told my husband about what happened to me after he left for work. I told him that it felt like I was dreaming, but at the same time it felt so real. My husband did believe me because, like I said earlier, our culture, we strongly believe in the paranormal. I am very confused, and so is my husband. We just don't know what it is or why it happened. For 9 months, my husband and I occupied one of the upstairs bedroom of his parents' crowded 3-bedroom home. After the wedding, it's a Hmong tradition to have the bride reside with the groom's side of the family. The primary reason is to have the wife get accustomed to how the family functions and to assist with the household chores. It was a cold December weekend when the husband and I were moving into our tiny 1-bedroom apartment on the north side of town. His parents were out of town attending a wedding with the majority of his siblings. The only people left at home were the both of us, his 4-year-old sister Heidi, and his younger brother who stayed behind to help us move. Now, to give you a background of his parents' house, which they still reside in today, it was built way back in the 1920s. While renovating the living room, we found old newspapers dating back to 1924. They were still used as insulation inside of the walls. The house has an eerie appearance and dark areas where no matter how much sunlight came into the home, that area would still be as dark as shadows. Moving on to the basement, I remember my husband telling me that when they moved in some 18 years ago, the basement had dirt ground and they had to replace it with concrete. Today, the basement is still unfinished with minimal lighting. It's a scary place to be if one was alone. So with the 4 of us at home, Heidi and I were upstairs packing the small, fragile items while my husband and his brother were still downstairs, loading our things into the moving truck. The only thing left in our room was the clothes in the closet, the TV, some DVDs, and my treasures, but they were junk according to my husband. While I packed the treasures into a box, Heidi was watching Disney's Beauty and the Beast in the room. I never liked to be upstairs in that house all by myself. I noticed Heidi kept looking at the closet. I thought perhaps she wanted to play dress up, so I pulled out some of my old party dresses and laid them on the floor for her to pick out. But she didn't bother to look at them because she was still focused on the closet. I was a bit concerned, so I sat in the middle between her and the closet. I veered her attention back to the TV screen. Every 3 minutes or so, Heidi leaned over me and stared at the closet. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing," she replied. We continued watching the movie. I was so glued to the set that the next thing I knew, she was standing in front of the closet with the door open. "What are you looking at?" I asked her. I was looking at the giant stuffed bear my husband had given to me for Valentine's. "Is that what you want?" "No. What is that?" Heidi asked without pointing to anything in particular. I looked around the closet. I didn't notice anything unusual. "What is what?" I asked, now very confused. So I opened the closet door further and went through the objects in it. Nothing was out of the ordinary, just clothes, shoes, and stuffed animals I was going to donate to Goodwill. All of a sudden, Heidi screamed and pointed at something in the closet. "That! What's that?" I looked up again. Nothing unusual. "I don't see what you're looking at." Suddenly, Heidi was jumping up and down and still focused on whatever it was in the closet. Her eyes were opened wide. It's a boy. He's as tall as I am. Who is he? What's the boy doing in your closet?" she questioned. "What boy?" I asked, still searching through the heaps of toys. A few seconds later, it hit me that this was an entity that allowed Heidi to see him, but not me. I screamed and ran downstairs with Heidi trailing behind me. Although I didn't see or hear anything, I was still afraid. When we got downstairs and joined the guys, Heidi was giggling. I told my husband what happened. He asked his sister what she saw and she replied, "I saw a boy sitting in the closet. He was as tall as I am and he kept looking at me. I tried to talk to him but he can't talk back." It was so funny because she was scared. She continued giggling. I was relieved that she found the situation amusing. I can still picture her face when she saw the boy. Her face went pale and her eyes were wider than ever. I was so afraid that it was going to traumatize her. It's been 2 years since the incident. The younger brother and his new bride are living in that room today. Recently, the wife said that she had a bad dream and she woke up to find a dark figure standing by the closet. I guess the boy is still there. This event happened sometime in the 90s and occurred in Stockton, California. I forgot the actual name of the park. I remember it being called 8th Street Park. It was close to the I-5 freeway. If you're familiar with this place, it had a soccer field, restrooms, playgrounds, and a river on top of the hill. People gambled there, sold food, and it was a great place for family to hang out. We used to go there a lot with my parents. My dad would be gambling and my mom would gossip with her friends. Most of the kids would just play around freely with no worries. I remember this day clearly. It was a breezy, sunny day. The smell of the air was like a rose unfolding, and the distinct scent makes you just want to lay down, close your eyes, and smell the aroma in the air. You could still hear the sounds of kids playing in the background, cars passing by, and the sounds of dice being thrown. An hour later, Mother Nature decided that she wanted to change the weather. Clouds came in, and it started to sprinkle a little bit. With my moment ruined, I decided to go up the hill and look at the river. I got to the top of the hill and looked across the river. It was a beautiful view, but I noticed something strange. The water level was rising at a slow pace. It was similar to how when we slip into a bathtub and the water rises due to our weight. There were some adults where I was at and other kids too. Then it started to rain harder, but nosy me decided to just stay up there. I then heard one of the adults yell out, "Snake! Snake!" I looked at the ground and there was no snake around me. Then I looked into the river. There was a humongous snake serpent creature coming down the river at a fast pace. People around me were running, but I stood there in shock. There was a woman standing on top of the snake's head. She stood up and turned her head and looked at me. I was still paralyzed from the shock and couldn't move. Her mouth didn't move, but she spoke to me. She told me to not be afraid. She was looking for someone. And then she just kept on going down the stream. I guess my mom heard the adults talking and found me on top of the hill. She grabbed my hands and asked me if I saw anything. I said I didn't, but I told her we couldn't come to this park for a while. I believe 1 week or 2 weeks later, 3 kids drowned there. I never knew the reason, but I remember what that lady said and how she said it to me. This happened way back in Laos. My dad told me that back in the days, there were a lot of mythical and powerful spirits that wandered all over Laos. This story is about my dad's older brother. I would always hear stories about how nice of a person he was, and how their entire family were very well known. Well, anyways, just after 2 to 3 years after the Secret War, my uncle decided to go on to be a soldier. He'd be away from home for quite some time to train, and he'd visit occasionally. One day, the army troops decided to train by a huge lake. They would go in groups and scout the area for practice. My uncle's group then came across one part of the lake that was covered in green moss or something, so they decided to rest there for a bit. My uncle then saw a huge snake-like shadow moving in the green lake, and he got all paranoid about it being a ghost or something. So then he divided to tell the other people in his troop to keep on going. A month went by and he came back to visit the family. My dad and his other brother were laying on the bed. When my uncle entered the house, my dad saw a dark shadow running behind him, and suddenly it ran underneath their bed, so he quickly jumped off and looked under it, but nothing was there. He thought that he could have been seeing things. The next day, my uncle gave my dad some money that he got from being in the army. This was so my dad could go watch movies with friends. Later that day, my uncle got really sick and wasn't able to stand properly. My grandpa would give him things like Hmong medicine, but that didn't work either. In the afternoon, my uncle felt like he had to use the restroom. My grandpa offered to take him, but my uncle refused, saying that it was too embarrassing, so he went alone. 2 to 3 hours later, my grandpa got really worried because he was gone for so long, so he got up and went to go check on my uncle. There he discovered the dead corpse of my uncle, all pale and lifeless. My grandpa gathered the entire family. My dad quickly ran back from the movies to see what happened. They couldn't believe that he passed away. That morning he was just perfectly fine. The next morning, they did a Hmong funeral and got the shaman to come and check out how my uncle died. The shaman said that while he was training near the big lake, he saw something and got frightened and lost his spirit there. A dragon lady took interest of him and wanted him to be her husband. It was because of this that he passed away. My sister-in-law told me that back in Thailand, her aunt was heading to the garden. On the way there, she got tired and took a nap under the tree by a lake. She fell into this very deep sleep. I guess the villagers found her, and she was somewhat in a coma. They took her back to the village to her parents' house. They know she wasn't dead because they could still feel her breathing, and she still had a pulse. A couple of days later, she woke up. Her parents asked her what happened and how did she get into that condition. She didn't know that she was in a coma for a couple of days. She said that she had the weirdest dream. She dreamt that when she fell asleep, a young man came to her and took her to his kingdom and wanted to marry her. She told him that she doesn't know him and that he should go find her parents first because they would be worried about her. He tried to grab her wrist and tell her to stay, but she was wearing one of those Hmong bracelets with those 2 snake heads. The 2 snake heads suddenly came alive, trying to bite the hand of the guy when he tried to grab her. He told her to go back home and take it off, and that he would be waiting for her. After telling her parents the story, they went to find a shaman and told him about it. He said for her to never take off the bracelet, and so she never took it off. After that day, after talking to the shaman, she dreamt about him. In the dream, he asked her why she hadn't taken off the bracelet yet. She told him that she will never take it off, and for him to leave because she won't marry him. The next day, when her parents woke up, they saw her sitting outside, just staring at the sky. She wouldn't or couldn't talk. She just kept staring on at the sky for a week. The shaman heard of this news and came back from the other villages. The parents then paid the shaman to fix their daughter. The next day, she was okay again. Her parents asked what happened to her. The shaman then replied, "A dragon spirit had been trying to take her for a while. When she took a nap by his lake, he came and took her to marry. She didn't want to marry him, so that's why he tried to grab her. The bracelet with the 2 snake heads will protect her. After I met with you, she dreamt about him and told him to go away. The spirit got mad and showed her his real form. Because of this, she kept on looking up because dragons are so tall, much taller than the trees. I guess after that she got better because my sister-in-law told me that part, and now her aunt is happily married and living in the US. My older sister was born about 28 years ago when my parents were still living in Laos. In the village that they were living in at the time, villagers were looking for gold in the riverbanks nearby. I heard my grandfather say that a villager promised the land or river spirit a human sacrifice for good gold. One day, my mother took my sister, who was 1 year old, to bathe in the river. Out of nowhere, my mother saw a streak of blood on her forehead. My sister wasn't hurt or anything. My mother quickly washed it away and she went back home. She didn't think much of it. Not too long after that, my parents had a huge argument. My father back then liked to go court girls and left my mother to fend for the family. With that argument, my father angrily slashed the front door, and as you know, houses back then were made out of straw. He did it out of anger and said some very hurtful words to my mother. A few days later, my sister became sick. My parents went and asked an uncle to come oneng. After he was done, he told my parents that he couldn't really help them. My sister was marked by a spirit, and along with my dad slashing the front door out of anger, he gave the spirit permission to come and take my sister. The house spirits were cut down and couldn't help. Within a short period of time, my sister passed away. My grandfather said that it was the land or river spirit that came to take my sister away, the one that the villager promised to sacrifice for. The villager didn't keep his promise and fled the village, and in return, many other villagers paid the price. My mother was upset, but eventually she had me and my siblings. About 4 years ago, while I was sitting in my room, my younger sister came crying to me. She said that while she was in the bathroom, out of nowhere, a random drop of blood fell on her arm. It wasn't a small drop, it was quite big. She washed it off quickly, but got really scared because she had seen a Hmong movie where a man randomly found a drop of blood on him and was soon later taken away by a dragon spirit. I asked her if it was just her nose bleeding or if she scratched herself, but she was serious that the blood appeared out of nowhere. We quickly told my mother, and that was when she told us the story of our older sister. She urgently got my grandfather to come oneng. My grandfather cut up a paper figure to use in his oneng to trade for my sister's spirit. He changed my sister's name and put leaves around our house to keep bad spirits away. The cause of her blood marking was from a dragon spirit. We used to go for family barbecues, maybe a little too much, by a river, and from there, a dragon spirit took a liking to my sister. The oneng added security and peace of mind to my sister, and I think we've only been back once since this has happened to her. So now, whenever we go out, near rivers, oceans, or forests, I don't sing and don't really talk about myself. According to elders, it's not good to sing, haikutia, or even talk highly about yourself. These things will attract bad spirits. Also, it's not good to go to places like that too much. My mother told me that back in Laos, one of our neighbors had a very beautiful daughter named Ba. The whole village praised her beauty, and all the men wanted to date her. Since all the houses were bamboo huts, my mother said that they would hear guys talking to Ba every night. One night, my mother woke up to go use the bathroom outside, and she heard a group of men kidnapping a girl. She was curious, so she walked toward the group of men and saw them kidnapping the neighbor's daughter, Ba. My mom saw Ba crying and a guy holding her hand, saying, "Don't cry, if I get married to you, I will love you." And back then, since this was a normal practice, but not anymore because of obvious reasons, my mom was like, oh, I guess they got a new son-in-law. And so she did her business and went back into the house to sleep. The next morning, my parents were woken up by a very loud cry from the neighbor's house. My dad told my mom to go check up on the neighbor. My mom told my dad not to worry and said that she saw a group of men kidnapping the neighbor's daughter last night. She said maybe the mother is just crying because her daughter got married. All of a sudden, they heard both the neighbors cry, so they decided to go check up on them. When my father got to the neighbor's house, he found out that Ba had passed away in her sleep. My mom got very scared and became ill. Because of this, my dad sought the help of a shaman to come and oneng for her. After that, the shaman told my parents that the group of men my mom saw kidnapping Ba were not human. Because the whole village kept on praising Ba's beauty, a dragon spirit had come to marry her. My mom wasn't supposed to see them, but because she was at the wrong place at the wrong time, she saw them, and one of them saw her. A couple of days later, Ba's mother had a dream that her daughter had come with her husband to visit. Ba's husband was very handsome, and he wore a very bright Hmong outfit with a lot of silver coins. They came to Watchong and pay Ba's dowry. Before Ba left, she told her mother not to worry and said that she was happy. When she woke up, she looked under her pillow and saw a bunch of leaves. I have been having dreams about the other world, like dragons, ghosts, spirits, and etc. These dreams are still happening to this day. Today, I'll only be telling one because it's a long dream. It was about a doja, and this happened 3 months ago. I came back from school and felt tired, so I laid down on the couch. I didn't bother doing any chores even though my mom told me because my uncles were coming to visit. The dream went like this. My family was having a barbecue in our backyard. In our backyard, there lives a small pond. Somehow, in my dream, the pond was more like a waterfall with huge rocks around it. My uncles and my dad were arguing about something. Then they started to get into a physical fight, so while that was happening, a huge whale-like fish came out of the water, but half of its tail was scaly. It did a flip that whales typically do, and as it came out of the water, it turned into a handsome young man. He had great wavy, flipped back hair, his face structures were perfect, and his figure was strong and manly. Anyways, he came out of the water, and he asked my dad and my uncles to stop because it was not going to get anywhere. They did, but later he was talking to me, just about how life was going on and things like that. I was really happy. It felt like we were the happiest people together. In this dream, time flew by fast because we did almost everything couples would do together. We would play fight, joke around, have trips to places, kissed in the rain, and etc. But after the barbecue, while we were cleaning up, he said he had to leave and go back into the water. As he walked back into the water, I was devastated, and I waited for days for him to come back. Every day after school, I would sit on our back porch, or even by the water, seeing if he would pop his head out. But he never showed up again. Months went by, and he finally popped out, but in the whale-like form. While in the dream, I was the happiest person because I got to see him. Then he came out in a human form, and he said to me that it was time for me to go. I asked where, and he said to just follow him. Me being in a happy mood, I followed him. He grabbed onto my hand and we slowly walked towards the water. By the time I regained focus, it was too late, and I was already under the water. But it wasn't pretty under the sea like The Little Mermaid. It was pitch black like squid ink. And then suddenly the world turned upside down, and it spinned. Out of nowhere, we were in front of this beautiful kingdom. He looked like a prince standing next to me. I was wearing different clothes. He was still holding on to my hand. As he walked, I followed him. We went into his house, and his father was in his chair in front of us with his other family members as if they were waiting for me. They all had scale-like skin on their arms but were still human. The girls had glitter shimmering around them, and they all looked so happy. They were a beautiful family. I don't know why, but I was really happy to still be with him. Later on, he told me that this underworld water is not my home, and I can't go back. I was still very happy, and I didn't care if I couldn't go back. All I wanted was to be by him. It felt like I had stayed with him for at least a week. Then, while he and I were getting ready for bed, I felt like something stabbed my back. As he tried to grab onto me, I had already vanished in thin air. At that moment before I vanished, I got one last glimpse of him, but it seemed as if from the side, someone or something shot him. After all that, I woke up and I was super dizzy. It felt like a migraine, but it wasn't. I asked my parents what happened because they were just surrounding me, and my uncles and my aunts were there. They looked frightened and confused and worried all at the same time. Later, they told me that I fell asleep after I came back from school, but I didn't wake up for 2 days straight. My mom had to perform a ritual. She said that there was a dragon spirit watching over me, but after spending time around me, he fell in love and wanted to marry me. He took my soul, but since he and his family didn't do a wedding yet, I wasn't included as part of their family, so that was how my mom got my soul back. I asked about the last thing I saw and about who shot him. My mom replied saying that it was her, but he was still alive since he's a spirit and cannot die. As I looked around, at every corner of the house was a small bowl of rice, and there was a red and white string tied to my wrist, my ankle, and one around my neck. As I went to shower, I saw some bruises on the side of my stomach and down my thighs. Every time I looked into the mirror, it looked like he was still there by my side, and I was wearing the same clothes when I was under the water. I knew it was just my imagination and our reflection. I was just hallucinating. But then as I leaned to look closer, it looked like I was growing scales on the side of my face, but really wasn't. Then I felt wind coming by and a voice saying, "Why did you leave me with sorrow? Why did you let your parents take you back? Why did you have them kill me? I thought you were happy with me. I won't forget you, so don't forget me. I love you." Even though I still have dreams of other love affairs with other spirits, I never had one with that Doja again. To be honest, it was the best dream I've had. I couldn't stop thinking about it when I woke up. Man, sounds like someone watches too many Chinese dramas. Just go get a real-life boyfriend instead, gosh. This story is set back in the early 2000s. It was about a pair of relatives that lived in Fresno. You might have already heard the story. The author decided to name the two people Lore 1 and Lore 2. That's just too complicated. I'm just gonna call one Lo and I'm gonna call the other one Tua, alright? It was early fall. Lo and Tua decided to go hunting for squirrels. They parked at a small open field, which was the beginning of a dirt path that led up to the woods ahead. This path was to lead hunters that got lost in the woods back to the open field, which was next to the main road that would lead back to the highway. Oh, that was a long sentence. Upon arrival, it was early afternoon and a warm day. Both cousins decided to depart ways and see who could get the most squirrels, and then meet back at the car within the next couple of hours for lunch. They were already much older in age and already married with kids. Tua wasn't having any luck with squirrels, so he decided to go back early in time for lunch. He waited and waited for many hours, but Lo hadn't returned. Tua already ate lunch and decided not to wait for his cousin. It was only a couple of more hours until the sun will soon set. Tua got worried, but he still waited, thinking that his cousin was getting lucky on squirrels. Perhaps this was why he didn't return. Tua started to doze off, standing by the car, waiting for his cousin Lo. He then heard someone calling his name. Looking up ahead to the path that led into the woods, he saw someone who was calling his name. What he saw freaked him out. Up ahead, it seemed to be a lady with long, curly hair, dressed in black, walking towards him. Tua was shocked and grabbed his gun quickly and shot at the lady that was up ahead, about 30 feet away. After blinking his eyes, Tua examined the body that he shot that had fell to the ground and realized that it was Lo, his cousin. Now, Tua was really afraid and did not know what to do. He just shot his cousin. He then drove off to a park ranger station, and from there an ambulance had to come to take Lo's body to the hospital. Unfortunately, Lo was already dead on the way to the hospital from losing too much blood. His family was then notified a few hours later. Relatives and Lo's family came to the hospital that night. Lo was handcuffed and sitting inside a police car outside the hospital by one officer. Some of the elders stayed behind to ask him what happened. The officer had cuffed Tua for refusing to tell the officer what happened. The officer then asked if the elders could talk to him and see if he would tell them anything. This was when he revealed to the elders what happened at the site. They all spoke in Hmong and made up a story about how the shooting was an accident. Tua was then locked up days later. A few days before Lo's funeral, a shaman was asked to come and do a ritual to get the truth. Although Lo was dead, his spirit was nowhere to be found. The shaman had gone to the other world in search of his spirit. The shaman then came upon the lady in black. Lo's spirit was with her. An agreement was made, and the shaman was able to make peace with Lo's spirit and the lady. Coming back, the shaman had told Lo's family about what happened, and why the lady did what she had done to him. When Lo separated from Tua, he came upon a bat during his hunt and shot the bat dead. The bat happened to be the lady's son posing as a bat to find food. Finding out that Lo killed her son, she locked Lo in a spell so that he couldn't get out of the woods. He got lost and couldn't find his way back for a few hours. He then prayed to his ancestors and the guardian of the woods. Eventually, this helped him get out of the woods and get back onto the path that would lead him back to Tua. The lady got angry and furious that Lo could meet up with his cousin. She then disguised Lo to look like her in front of Tua. This is what triggered his cousin to kill Lo, and it worked. The author states that this story is true, so if you go hunting, be careful, and remember your firearm safety test. I remembered reading a story here about Lore and Lore's 2 hunting story, so I would like to share one that happened in Fresno, California. It started off during the weekdays that the uncle would call the nephew if he was available to go squirrel hunting that weekend. The nephew told him yes. Then he informed his parents that his uncle was going to take him out hunting for the first time in 5 years. The day finally came. The uncle and nephew reached their secret spot a bit early, around 4 a.m. when it was still dark. The uncle told the nephew that he was going to sleep because it was still too early, so they decided to both sleep inside of the car. Then the uncle had a strange dream. He dreamt of seeing a group of Hmong or Mien people surrounding his truck and knocking on his window. In his dream, they were talking and arguing. Before he almost woke up, the uncle remembered one of the Hmong or Mien leaders saying, "We're going to take him away regardless of if he will come with us." Then the uncle woke up. It was 6 a.m. He didn't say anything, but wished for a good hunt only. The uncle then woke up his nephew and told him to gear up and to plan where they were going. They both hunted for a while. It was around 11 a.m. The nephew decided to wander into other areas searching for squirrels. The uncle said that he saw a squirrel running back and forth, so he took a shot with his 12-gauge shotgun. Happy that he got something, he went to check it out. Only it was his nephew laying on the ground. The side of his head was blown out from the shotgun shell. The uncle was so scared and drove back to the street to get cell phone reception and called the cops. The nephew was dead. The hardest part was that the nephew's dad didn't know what to do because it was his own brother that shot his son. The mom wanted the uncle to serve jail time, but the father didn't want to bring shame to the family. The uncle slept the next day and dreamt about these Hmong Mien leaders saying, "We got him, and now he's our slave. I have told all my hunting partners that if any of us has a bad dream, please let everyone know because I'd rather cancel a hunting trip than lose my friend." One day, my dad went hunting with some of my uncles for squirrels somewhere in California. They stopped at their usual spot and discussed to decide who should partner up with who. They then split up and each pair headed their own separate ways. That time, they decided to camp at night and hunt again in the morning so each pair doesn't have to hurry back when it gets dark. That way, they could take their time if they wanted to, so my dad and one of the uncles took a spot near the creek. My uncle said to my dad that he should watch the spot while my uncle goes across the creek and watches the other side, so my dad did as my uncle suggested. Nighttime was approaching and the sun was starting to go down. By that time, my dad has not seen any single squirrels and he was getting very tired. He remembered that he was in the state of almost going to sleep, but he is still awake because he could still hear birds singing in the distance and the running water from the creek. Then, all of a sudden, he felt the ground shaking. It felt like something huge was coming towards my dad. He felt as though something was going to come out of nowhere and might eat him. The sound of the footstep sounded like a loud thump, thump. My dad remembers that his gun was next to him, so he grabbed it quickly and got ready to shoot. Just as he got into that position, ahead of him, he sees the trees get knocked down one after another. Something big was heading his way, and really fast. My dad started to sweat, and just as he wiped away his sweat with one of his hands, the monster finally showed itself to him. My dad described it as this giant Bigfoot-like creature with huge white fangs and a pair of glowing red eyes. The thing was drooling, hungry, and ready to eat my dad, so he pointed his gun at the monster's head and fired. To my dad's surprise, the gun didn't fire. He thought that maybe he forgot to turn the safety off, or perhaps his gun jammed. He checked really quickly. Nothing was wrong with his gun. He fired again. Nothing. The monster starts to run towards my dad. He readies his gun, ready to hit it with the butt as the monster was within reach, but the monster ran faster than he thought, and he couldn't swing in time. It grabbed both of my dad's arms and pinned him down to the ground. My dad thought that this was really it and screamed really loud for help. Then the monster slapped my dad really hard and he woke up. When he woke up from his dream, my uncle pinned both of my dad's arms to the tree behind him. My uncle asked him, "What's wrong? You almost tried to shoot me with your gun. If I didn't go for your hands first and hold them tightly, you would have killed me." My dad said, In my dreams, you were a giant monster trying to eat me, and I got really scared, so I grabbed my gun and was trying to kill the monster before he ate me." After that, they hurried back to camp. At camp, my dad told them what happened. Everyone decided to pack up and go home for the rest of the day. They didn't camp for that night. My dad likes to go hunting in his spare time. He usually goes hunting overnight. One time, my dad went hunting and brought back a spirit. On nights that my dad was gone, my mom would feel someone getting into bed and sleeping beside her. She started then to sleep out in the living room when my dad was hunting overnight. My sister would sleep out in the living room too, so that my mom wouldn't feel so uneasy. One morning, my mom said that my dad woke her up to help him pack lunch and help him put his hunting stuff into the car. She didn't get right up at that moment, but when she finally did get up, she said that my dad was already gone. When my dad got home, she said why was he such in a hurry to leave that morning. He told her that he didn't come home at all that morning because he was still out hunting. My parents own chicken coops. One morning, my mom woke up to go to the chicken coop. After my mom had left, my sister started to wake up. She saw my dad putting on his socks. She asked him if he was going to go to the chicken coop to help my mom, and he said yes, so my sister just went back to bed. When my mom got back, my sister asked my mom where my dad was, and she told her that my dad was still hunting and hasn't come back home yet. My sister told my mom that she swore she saw him leave to go to the chicken coop to help her, but my mom said that he wasn't going to be home until later that afternoon. My dad started to have nightmares about getting dragged by his neck and getting hung onto a tree. Soon, my dad started to get really sick, so we did jingle bells for my dad. It turns out, it was his spirit that was getting dragged and hung onto the tree. They also had to erase my dad's trail from the time when he went hunting because that was how he brought the ghost back home with him. The feeling that my mom had when she felt like someone was getting into the bed with her was the ghost. My quote-unquote dad that my sister saw was the spirit disguised as my dad. I remember when they did oneng for my dad, there was a dollhouse with a doll in it to lock the ghost spirit inside of it. This story happened to me in Fresno, California. As a Hmong American, I never actually believed what my parents told me about not to yell or say stupid stuff out in the wilderness. In 2006, my buddies and I went on a long hunting trip and we were driving back home. We decided to take Albury Road from Table Mountain Casino, driving back to Clovis. It was dark and the time would be around 11 p.m. I was sitting in the passenger seat and two buddies in the back. We were all drinking inside the car, but not the driver. My friend that was driving spotted something and told me to keep it low and don't do anything stupid because my windows were rolled down. I didn't listen to him, and so I peeked out the window and yelled out profanities of all sort, acting like I was tough. When we all arrived home safely, I took a shower and went to sleep. That night, I was continuously having nightmares about seeing two Native Americans, a woman and a man, following me and trying to block my path. The next day, I drove back to San Jose, California, and weird things started to happen. As I was driving, a hawk hit my front bumper of my BMW and left a feather and a scratch mark. Then I arrived back at my apartment and opened the front door. I was suddenly hit with a strong odor of burnt wood in the living room next to my bedroom. I asked my roommate and he told me that there was nothing. I tried to investigate where the odor was coming from but couldn't find it. That night, I went to sleep and was continuously having nightmares again, seeing two Native Americans grabbing my leg and hand. I was screaming and fighting with them in my dreams. Every time I woke up and fell back to sleep, my dream would continue from where I woke up. I woke up 13 times that night, and I could still feel the hand marks on my leg and wrist from the dream. The drum and Native American chanting was whispering into my ears. This terrified me deeply, and so I called my mom at 3 a.m. in the morning. My mom did some ritual things at home and called me to say, "Did you yell out or wanted to challenge something?" And I replied, "Yes." My mom did more stuff and told me to grab a knife and did some things to protect myself while I was away from my parents. That night, I was able to sleep better without nightmares, and I saw a vision of my ancestors in Hmong clothes dragging me back to my parents' house. That's why you don't act tough, man. I will not disclose the location or any real names because just writing about this event gives me the chills. I definitely don't want a visit from these people. I know multiple people who have shared this story, and mentioning the real names then got a visit from them in the most scariest of ways. This is a long story. About 4 years ago, Mai's older brother Yi and two of his friends, Thu and Meng, went hunting on Thu's land. The three friends split up and went in different directions. A little while afterwards, there was a gunshot, followed by faint screaming. Both friends ran towards the direction of the gunshot, thinking their friend Yi got a big one. When they arrived at the location, they didn't see their friend Yi. Instead, they saw Thu's dad standing there, pale as a ghost, screaming for help. They ran over and saw that Yi had been shot and was bleeding on the ground. Thu took off running towards their house to get a phone or service signal. It took the ambulance 45 minutes to get to their location. Yi, unfortunately, did not make it to the hospital due to where the bullet was located. Thu's dad swore he saw a deer and was aiming at the deer. He shot his gun and walked towards the deer dropped. Once he got to the location, he didn't see the deer. Instead, he saw his son's friend. The police did an investigation and found the father innocent and ruled it as accidental shooting. No charges were pressed. Thu's family did pay for some of the funeral costs. After the incident with Yi, his family moved out of the state. They left behind their newly built house to their daughter, Mai, and her little family. 2 years later, Mai lived in the house with her husband and 3 children. All of her children were under the age of 3. It all started with bad and scary reoccurring dreams about people calling for her and showing themselves in the scary forms of banzongs. She told her husband about them. He told her to brush it off. He was young himself and didn't want to put too much attention to it, thinking they were just dreams. They are both still shaman, but not hardcore religious. Then, these entities started to show themselves to Mai. At times, they would look like normal people walking around her house. Other times, they looked really scary, like Panzong. She told her husband once again, and this time, he told his parents. Unfortunately, his parents didn't really like Mai because they wanted their son to marry someone else. The husband's parents said that they will seek help when they have time. So, with this, her husband asked a shaman to tie red strings around Mai. It helped for a little bit, but not for too long. They also had a hoopli for Mai, but that also didn't seem to help because she was still seeing and hearing things. 2 months went by. By this time, Mai started to feel like she was going crazy. They scared her and her children, especially her infant and her 2-year-old. Her kids would wake up from night terrors every time they fell asleep. Her infant was always crying for no reason. Mai started to lose weight due to not having any appetite, and bags started to form under her eyes because she wasn't able to sleep much. She started to look really unhealthy. Mai would then start to talk to herself or talk to the people she saw around her. She would laugh and start saying crazy things to her husband and friends. She would then point out the people she sees and describe them to her husband and friends who went over to be there for her. It got very uncomfortable and scary at times. Her husband told her parents everything and requested for them to come and stay with Mai for a few weeks to make sure that she was okay and help out with the kids until she got better. Her mother was worried and came to stay with her. Before she came, she went to seek spiritual help from a few shamans. All the shamans that she spoke to told her that they needed to uneng for their daughter quickly because something was taking her spirit farther and farther away from her body. Mai's mother told the in-laws this when she arrived. They assured her that they would find a shaman and perform the rituals as soon as they could, quote-unquote. While Mai's poor mother was staying with her, she kept hearing Mai speak to a person she called a Yi. She asked her daughter who she kept talking to. Mai then told her that she was talking to her brother. She said that her brother has been visiting her frequently because he knows that the other people scare her. He told her that he was there for her and for her not to be scared of him. Her mother stayed with her for a month, then went back to do some errands and was planning on coming back to take her daughter with her to get some help. Who writes these long-winded sentences? Anyways, while her mother was away, Mai started to have dreams of animals coming to the house. Before they leave, they would go and gnaw on Mai's head. Mai woke up from the dreams with terror. She went to the bathroom to wash up and noticed that she was getting a bald spot where the animals were gnawing on her head. She showed her husband, his family, and her friends. Mai was scared for her life at this point. She called her mother and cried her heart out, saying that she was too young to die. Her kids needed a mother, and she was ready to not go yet. Her mother made plans with her to go up to her family. They were going to seek a very powerful shaman that would be able to help her. Mai must have known she wouldn't make it up there because she told her mom it was going to be too late. She said her goodbyes to her mother that night and asked her mother to love and help take care of her kids. Her mother told her to stop talking nonsense. That was their last conversation. A week later, Mai got into a car accident and died. A truck had hit her from behind and threw her body out of the car. She died due to head trauma. She came in a dream to her husband and told him that they came for her. She fought them off and she won, but by the time she broke away and got back to where her body was, it was gone. That's tragic. May she rest in peace.